we're going to do today a profile of another 2020 Democratic candidate. Now, when I set out to do this series, I wasn't really expecting there to be so many candidates. And I don't know if I'm going to do every candidate, but I think this one's important enough just because of some of the topics that he addresses, even if you don't agree with him. So yeah, we're going to do Mike Gravel today. No polling is available. He's not really on. He doesn't really have a pulse on the national stage, and you'll see some of why that is. But you have to understand that the goal of the Gravel campaign isn't necessarily the same as someone like Kamala Harris or Beto O'Rourke or whoever it is. He openly is saying that he's not campaigning to win the nomination. He's campaigning to move the party left. Before we keep going, I want you to like, share, and subscribe. Also, subscribe to me on Minds.com so you can receive the most up-to-date information on future streams or on uploads that are going live or premiering. You can also subscribe to me on BitChute in case you don't get YouTube notifications. So Mike Gravel, I think, has a very admirable life. He was born in 1930 in Springfield, Massachusetts, and he's actually of French Canadian descent. His birth name was Maurice Robert Gravel, and his parents were Marie Barraza and Alphonse Gravel. And he attended Catholic schools when he was growing up, and he had learning disorders. He attended Assumption College in Worcester in the late 40s and early 50s. And the people cited as his main inspirations were British philosopher Bertrand Russell and the American investigative journalist Isidore Stone. So it's interesting, those people would be typically seen as members of either the old left or old liberalism. People like Bertrand Russell were staunchly anti-war. In fact, Russell was one of the earliest advocates of nuclear disarmament in the early 60s. But of course, that was before the hippie left became more in vogue. So Gravel, if you look at Bernie Sanders as a dinosaur, Gravel is almost like a troglodyte. He's one of the he is almost like taking someone with a time machine from a previous generation of what it meant to be progressive or a liberal. Certainly, you could say that there are elements of both Bertrand Russell and I.F. Stone in modern liberalism and progressivism, but you have to consider the fact that, so I don't want to blow those two out of proportion, but they both appear to have been somewhat Zionist, and Mike Gravel is anything but. In fact, he's one of the few candidates, he's the only candidate to have expressly supported the Palestinian side in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Another thing interesting was that he served in the army in the early 50s. So this was a Korean War era. He does say in a later quote that this isn't the country I fought for, referring to today, but that doesn't refer to Korea. He actually served in Germany in the post-war occupation forces. Now, what does that mean? So he didn't necessarily risk his life in the same way that some of these people, like these Korean War vets did. Which, but by the way, the Korean War, if you don't know, was one of the most dangerous conflicts America's ever been involved in terms of, some of these troops were just freezing to death. But in Germany, he was basically living the life of an undercover spy and infiltrating these communist organizations that were trying to pull American allies over to the Soviet bloc. And maybe we'll talk about that later. He was also an Alaska state legislator for 4 years in the 60s. He'd come back and he went to Columbia, and I think he got a degree in economics or something. And then, so he moved to Alaska. He was basically going there. He was trying to become what I believe he phrased as a modern day pioneer. And among the issues that he drove forward when he was there, so he was a real estate investor and developer over there, but then he got elected to the state House of Representatives, and he actually helped Alaska Natives to attend local high schools in Alaska, whereas apparently prior to that, a lot of them had to journey to Bureau of Indian Affairs high schools over in the rest of the country, the lower 48, as they're called. And then he ran for the U.S. House of Representatives and lost in 1966. So let's watch a little bit about. So in 1968, he won a primary election against a Democratic incumbent, Ernest Gruning, and he was seen as a bit more of a pro-business candidate. But as it so happens, he was actually also more anti-war at the time. And he read the Pentagon Papers into the record, and this is an interesting clip of him.
The people must know the full story of what has occurred over the past 20 years within their government. The story is a terrible one. It is replete with duplicity, connivance against the public and public officials. I know of nothing in our history to equal it for extent of failure and extent of loss in all aspects of the term. We can people, human beings, are being killed as I speak to you tonight, killed as a direct result of policy decisions we as a body have made. Arms are being severed. Metal is crashing through human bodies because of a public policy. This government
So you can see he actually broke down and cried during the reading of the Pentagon Papers into the record. So yeah, Mike Gravel is somebody who's he would be considered a titan of the anti-war movement, at least compared to a lot of the other people who have been in the Senate since then. You know, and he goes and compares himself very starkly to some of these other senators. I think we have actually a clip of that in the next slide. So in 2008, he ran for president against the main candidates, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, in the Democratic primary, and he actually called out the other senators that were in the race as hypocrites because some of them had themselves voted for the Iraq War, as Clinton did and as well as Biden. I don't remember whether John Edwards did, but I would assume from his reaction to him, he did. So, yeah, I think you certainly have to respect Mike Gravel for swimming against the tide in the Democratic Party. Here's a couple clips of him getting involved in that race.
No, Hillary's got other problems, and if we want, we can discuss those. But she's, as I view, the most dangerous person on the Democratic side to become the president. What we're going to get is Clintonism and DLC, which is controlled by the Democratic Party.
The DLC is the Democratic Leadership Caucus.
By the bankers on Wall Street, the hedge fund people, and we'll have the continuation of what happened in the last administration. They'll prosper, and the average American won't get anything from the prosperity.
And here he is at the Democratic debates. This was like really, and you have to understand, in 2008, I was waking up thanks to the Rand Paul movement. But Mike Gravel was having the same effect among other people on the left.
and former Alaska Senator Mike Gravel. Senator, thank you. And Senator Gravel, for those who may not be familiar with your past, 2 terms U.S. Senate from Alaska, you played a role in the fight to cut off money for the Vietnam War. What would be your advice, Senator, for the elected officials on this stage who are at a conflict, opposed to the conflict, but also feel the need to keep on funding the conflict?
Well, first off, understand that this war was lost the day that George Bush invaded Iraq on a fraudulent basis. Understand that. Now, with respect to what's going on in the Congress, I'm really embarrassed. So we passed, and the media is in a frenzy right today with what has been passed. What has been passed? George Bush communicated over a year ago that he would not get out of Iraq until he left office. Do we not believe him? We need to find another way. That's where I really would like to sit down with Pelosi and with Reid, and I would hope the other senators would focus on how do you get out? You pass a law, not a resolution, a law, making it a felony to stay there. And I'll give you the text of it. And if you're worried about filibuster, here's what you do tactically. They can pass it in the House. We got the votes there. In the Senate, let them filibuster it. And let Reid call up at 12 o'clock every day to have a cloture vote and let the American people see clearly who's keeping the war going and who's not. And that's just the beginning of the tactic if they're tough enough to do it.
Senator Gravel.
So that's something, and we're going to keep watching this because there's a astonishing quote for a debate. He's basically saying if you're going to take a position on a war, you better make it count. You better really mean it, or else you're just posturing and virtue signaling.
At a forum earlier this year, I want to get this right, you said it doesn't matter whether you are elected president or not. So then, why are you here tonight? Shouldn't debates be for candidates who are in the race to win the race?
Ryan, you're right. I made that statement. But that's before I had a chance to stand with them three times. It's like going into the Senate. You know, the first time you get there, you're all excited. My God, how did I ever get here? Then about 6 months later, you say, how the hell did the rest of them get here? And I got to tell you, after standing up with them, some of these people frighten me. They frighten me. When you have mainline candidates that turn around and say that there's nothing off the table with respect to Iran, that's code for using nukes, nuclear devices. I got to tell you, I'm President of the United States.
It's a good point. It is a good point because if you really look, I would be remiss to say that I am not a fan of the government in Iran, but to say that I want to nuke Iran would be way too far. I think. And even going in and having a conventional war with Iran, I don't think would be in our interest. But Mike Gravel said it straight up. If you're saying that all options are on the table, that does include nukes.
There will be no preemptive wars with nuclear devices. To my mind, it's immoral, and it's been immoral for the last 50 years as part of American foreign policy.
Let's use a little moderator discretion here. Senator Gravel, that's a weighty charge. Who on this stage exactly tonight worries you so much?
Well, I would say the top-tier ones. Top-tier ones. They've made statements. Oh, Joe, I'll include you too. You have a certain arrogance. You want to tell the Iraqis how to run their country. I got to tell you, we should just plain get out. Just plain get out. It's their country. They're asking us to leave, and we insist on staying there. And why not get out? What harm is it going to do? Oh, you hear the statement, well, my God, these soldiers will have died in vain. The entire deaths of Vietnam died in vain. And they're dying in vain right this very second. And you know what's worse than a soldier dying in vain? Is more soldiers dying in vain. That's what's worse.
Short answer question. One sentence.
So this is something, you don't have to agree with him, but again, this is someone who is not willing to mince words about what he really means. And that's one of the reasons I think that Gravel was so popular. Well, I wouldn't say he was terribly popular, but he certainly caught a lot of people's attention.
And I'm going to ask each of you, beginning with Senator Gravel. This is from Paula in Conway, South Carolina. What is the most significant political or professional mistake you have made in the past 4 years? And what, if anything, did you learn from this mistake which makes you a better candidate? And make the sentence no longer than 20 seconds, okay? Senator Gravel.
I've just grown up. I'm the senior statesman on here, and I was beginning to feel like a potted plant standing over here. But let me point out to you, in one sentence, I won't hold their youth and inexperience against them.
Thank you, sir. Representative.
Same question. Other than Iraq, three most important enemies to the United States.
We have no important enemies. What we need to do is to begin to deal with the rest of the world as equals, and we don't do that. We spend more as a nation on defense than all the rest of the world put together. Who are we afraid of? Who are you afraid of, Brian? I'm not. And Iraq has never been a threat to us. We invaded them. I mean, it is unbelievable. The military-industrial complex not only controls our government, lock, stock, and barrel, but they control our culture.
So he did that on the stage. He was standing, by the way, next to Dennis Kucinich, who himself was considered fairly anti-war at the time, and he really stood out there because he's willing to directly call out both the politicians and the military-industrial complex.
For 2 terms in the Senate representing Alaska, sat on top of course, a huge reserve of oil. With the French system as the model, is the United States, in your view, woefully behind in its use of nuclear energy?
No, not at all. I think there had to be a maturation process, and I'm the one that started the nuclear critique in this country. I'm also the one that denied the boots on the ground for George Bush today when I filibustered the end of the draft. And I'm also the one that brought about the Alaska pipeline by 1 vote in the Congress. So when you ask about the energy issues or the other issues, let me just tell you, I want to answer the question on the war and on what's going on. We are mischaracterizing terrorism. Terrorism has been with civilization from the beginning, and it will be there till the end. We're going to be as successful fighting terrorism as we are fighting drugs with a war. It doesn't work. What you have to do is to begin to change the whole foreign policy. The Republicans who are charging Democrats about not going for the defense of this country, my God, this invasion brought about more terrorists. Osama bin Laden must have been rolling in his blankets how happy he was over our invading Iraq.
Time is Senator Gravel. 30 seconds, please.
No, with respect to Iran, we've sanctioned them for 26 years. We scared the bejesus out of them when the president says they're evil. Well, you know something? These things don't work. They don't work. We need to recognize them. And you know something? Who is the greatest violator of the Non-Proliferation Treaty? The United States of America. We signed a pledge that we would begin to disarm, and we're not doing it. We're expanding our nukes. Who the hell are we going to nuke?
Senator,
tell me, Barack, who are you want to nuke?
I'm not planning to nuke anybody right now, Mike. I promise you.
Good.
Okay, so yeah, I guess Barack Obama didn't nuke anyone. Maybe he couldn't find an excuse for it. Very, very sharp guy, was able to command the stage. And I think people were shocked in the audience that they were hearing somebody like that, so critical, and he was so anti-war that the Democratic Party, which was thriving on the anti-war message in the 2000s, they weren't even prepared for it. So here's a couple of other videos concerning the current campaign. We'll see how much of the second one we get through. But this is his the Gravel rock Gravalanche video, which I think some of you have probably seen.
But let's maybe bring up the topic of the day, which is the Green New Deal.
How much will this cost? That's unclear. How will we pay for it? Unknown.
It's not realistic.
Because there's no way to pay for it.
It's immoral.
The younger generation now tells me how tough things are. Give me a break. No. I have no empathy.
I'm guided by the beauty of our weapons.
I think Medicare for all is one of the possible paths.
So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy. This was a little controversial in San Francisco.
He did ask you yes or no. Would you support free college for all?
I am not for free four-year college for all, no.
Human beings are being killed as I speak to you tonight, killed as a direct result of policy decisions we as a body have made.
This approach of war on drugs has not succeeded. We've spent billions of dollars on it.
And we fill up our prisons to the point where we're the embarrassment of the world. We're supposed to be a democracy. We've got more people in prison, 2.3 million people in prison.
We spend more as a nation on defense than all the rest of the world put together. This whole nation should be a sanctuary for the world. I'm ashamed as an American to be building a fence on our southern border. That's not the America that I fought for. Our soldiers died in Vietnam in vain. You can now, John, go to Hanoi and get a Baskin-Robbins ice cream cone.
Why do they hate us so in so many places around the world?
Because we kill so many people wantonly. Oh, Joe, I'll include you too. You have a certain arrogance. You want to tell the Iraqis how to run their country. And we can get off of gasoline in 5 years, and we can get off of carbon in 10 years. All we got to do is want to do it. Just plain get out. It's their country. They're asking us to leave, and we insist on staying there. The military-industrial complex not only controls our government, lock, stock, and barrel, but they control our culture. It's time to make some waves for change. I'm Mike Gravel, and I'm running for president.
All right, and these were the kids who were behind drafting him into the campaign.
There is no military expert.
Senator Mike Gravel served the great state of Alaska from 1969 to 1981. Then he dropped off the radar for a while, until 2008, when he ran for the Democratic nomination for president and earned a few new fans with his weird super lefty campaign. After that, he disappeared again. Nowadays, he lives in California. He's 88, and a group of kids are about to give him another chance to be a thing.
How are you?
So excited to meet you.
Please meet
I'm Henry.
You're Henry.
Hi, I'm Ben. The funny thing about this is that it kind of transcended a particular interest. It just seemed too exciting of an idea to not do.
None of the people at this table want Mike Gravel to be president, including Mike Gravel.
Yeah, I don't want to be president.
Yeah.
I'm too old.
Yeah.
The plan is to get Gravel enough donors to make the 2020 Democratic debate stage, and then poke Democrats with extremely lefty takes.
Nothing's happened in my issues in 10 years. And that's what persuaded me to give you my Twitter account. and you're just using me.
Yeah.
And I don't mind being used.
A little more to your left. There.
The massively online team is a relatively new addition to American politics. They exist both on the left and the right. They're the kids posting memes all day long and swarming to attack people they think are lame on Twitter. They have a cynic's detachment and an idealist's optimism, often in a single internet post.
That's so shocking. Cut!
So, before we get to my opinion on this, let's talk about the viability. I think these are all like interesting videos, but let's talk a little bit more about where Gravel fits in on this. So I did keep his picture here, but whatever. He's definitely not going to be attractive to people who are close to the center, who are looking for policies that are pro-business or are, for example, looking to keep taxes low, things like that. But that fits him in squarely in the progressive camp, competing especially with competitors or rivals, I should say, not to be redundant, like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Tulsi Gabbard, also Andrew Yang I include as a progressive sometimes. In terms of the blue collar vote, I don't know if there's going to be enough exposure of him in the heartland for him to win any of that. So the viability of him is not really the issue. Mike Gravel, as you saw in the previous clip, is not necessarily geared towards trying to win any states or anything. He's trying to be on the stage and be able to shout back at a lot of these people who are some of the more visible candidates and tell them to steer their campaigns in a certain direction. In terms of the map, I didn't take down the Andrew Yang, but who cares? So Mike Gravel, of course, Alaska is one of the later states. So if anybody is going to really vote for him in large numbers, you would think it would be in the home state. Other states that could be potential places where he could get some votes at least, you would look, for example, at, I'd say, Vermont, New Hampshire, Oregon, Washington State. But he, like I said, he's not necessarily a candidate who is going to win a lot of states or a lot of votes or really any delegates. So in closing, why even talk about Mike Gravel? You know, it actually said that the kids are running his Twitter account, which means it could be that the whole thing where, you know, some of these tweets are pretty caustic and they go directly in attacking the Democratic candidates. The Free Palestine tweet, I wonder if it was Gravel's idea or theirs, but let's assume it was his. It doesn't matter. There are priorities that people have been trying to push forward in the Democratic Party for years. And of course, there's always people in the center that say, well, this can't really happen. No, we don't really have the votes to get this through. You know, some of them are pushing, for example, this Equal Rights Amendment for women since the mid-'70s, and it just doesn't have any steam to get through either the Senate or the House. Now, I would say, first of all, that the majority of these policies I don't agree with anyway. So I would not vote for Mike Gravel on that basis either. But in terms of the policy of being anti-war, I do think the Democratic Party needs another strong anti-war voice right now. The real problem is that you see these progressives over here, and the majority of them are not really focused on that. You see, for Elizabeth Warren, I would say, has been hawkish on Russia. Marianne Williamson is not really very well versed on foreign policy at all, so we can't even count her for that. Andrew Yang has been pretty cryptic on foreign policy. If you're a progressive who's focused on economic issues, I would say Andrew Yang gives you something to think about, but on foreign policy, it's almost a complete mystery. Then with Tulsi Gabbard, you do have someone who's a strong non-interventionist. I think that Tulsi Gabbard is a person that you should vote for if you're trying to keep Americans out of harm's way overseas. And I would consider, you know, I'm not a Democrat. I would still consider registering in the primary and voting for Tulsi Gabbard in order to send a message against intervention around the world. Personally, as someone who's critical of that. Bernie Sanders is not the non-interventionist that he used to be. He's certainly not a war hawk, but you can see his weakening over the years when it comes to Russia. When it comes to this trade war with China, I think you have to really debate whether Bernie Sanders would be a good representative. Mike Gravel doesn't offer much of a perspective to support on a lot of issues that are going out there, including trade, including, you know, energy policy at the moment. Although I would say he's one of the greener people. He's probably for the Green New Deal. Another reason I would not vote for him. But if you do want someone who is on the stage who offers a different perspective than the rest of the Democratic Party, then you do have to consider Gravel in contrast to almost anyone else in the party except for possibly Tulsi Gabbard and Andrew Yang. And yes, Bernie does overlap to some degree with Mike Gravel. So that's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also subscribe to me on BitChute, where you can see the videos with a lot more reliability in terms of notifications. You can track all of the developments in terms of stuff that I release on Minds.com at Chef Leopard. You can also see most of the time I'll share something on Gab at Starscream85. And as usual, you can follow me here on Bold Like a Leopard. I also have a second channel called Razor Ray Special Cuts, and this playlist is also on my YouTube channel. See you guys later, and have a meaningful Memorial Day.
Bring on the dancing horses, and this and all.